All right, you guys, we have a great episode today. We're going to be talking with Jeremy Pryor about doing discipleship and disciple making as a family. Now, this episode, we get into depth of how do we get to mission as a family team, beginning with discipleship, and then even what are the things about family culture, family unit, how do you develop a team culture as a family? And really, like, if your family's not here, what are some areas that you're going to have to re-examine in order to rebuild this culture as a family? It's a great conversation. Honestly, the episode gave me vision. It challenged me. And so I know you're going to love it. Check it out right here. All right, friends, today I'm with Jeremy Pryor, and so he is going to share with us a number of different areas on how we can next level disciple making, discipleship. And let me read off to you guys who Jeremy is, and then Jeremy, I'll let you can let me know, did I miss anything? So according to your website, you help fathers build profitable businesses, life-giving rhythms, and multi-generational families on mission. It sounds like you're a serial entrepreneur. You launched and then sold Epifio, which is a media ads agency. You're now running family teams, which I think we're going to get into with some of the discussion today. You are running a house church network and movement, if I'm not mistaken, in your city. And then you're also into real estate. So our other friend, Jeremy, would be a cool mutual connection. You'll have a lot in common, actually. So what did I miss? What would you add on to that before we jump into the discussion?
Well, now I have 3 grandbabies and 1 on the way. Okay. So 5 kids. Yeah. So awesome. A lot of what I do is, thinking through how to help, our family kind of multi-generationally. We live in a 4-generation household. So a lot of things. I spent a lot of time in Israel. That's where I met my wife. And got a lot of downloads from the Lord through conversations that we've been able to have with our friends there, Jewish and Arab families, and bringing a lot of those ancient ways of thinking about family back to the West. I grew up in Seattle, so my story was very individualistic. And so just trying to explore as very much a non-native of what it's like to build a multi-generational family and be all about the mission of the kingdom. That's kind of the core of what I think God's led us into. Awesome.
Well, that being said, one of the discussions that I said I'd love to have with you for our community is on this idea of family as a team, and that has a lot to do with mission. And so you've already kind of elaborated in that a little bit, but let's continue to pull that thread. And maybe for anyone listening, no, let me just hand off to you. Like, what's the big idea here? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah. The big idea is that we are in the middle of a experiment on the family over the last 150 years that's not going well. So for thousands of years, families lived as multi-generationally, and they functioned as teams. They would economically produce value through the home. They do ministry in and through the home. They would do their life, and everything was centered around the household. This has been the way it has been for thousands of years. And it's the way the Bible exclusively describes family. And after the Industrial Revolution, about 150 years ago, we began experimenting with a new kind of family, really a family that does most of its productive activity outside the home as individuals. And they come back together, in the evenings or during the weekends to sort of kind of recreate, reconnect, and then launch out again as individuals. And then, of course, at around 18 years of age, you're launched out into the world as a free-floating individual to, if you care to, start a brand new family, and hit the reset button. And so that family has about an 80-year memory. They don't know who their great-grandparents are. They don't really know where they came from. None of that stuff's very relevant because they're primarily thinking of themselves as individuals. And the statistics are that where this idea of family has been pursued, it's been a total disaster. That, in the United States, for example, we have the most single parent households than any country in the entire world. Our divorce rates, famously hovers around 50%. In India, for example, where they continue to live out this more classical vision of family, the divorce rate's 1.1%. And so it's very clear that this idea of the kind of atomized family, or this family nest, we love using the word nest because that's really the modern family is sort of a nest. You kind of cultivate the chickies and launch them out. That idea has just not worked well. And so the alternative idea, the one you see in the Bible, is that the family is designed to be a multi-generational team on mission. And most people today, if you ask most Western people, they don't realize they've adopted a very novel and experimental version of the family. This is all we've ever known. That's all I knew growing up. This was the air I breathed, and it made it impossible for me to diagnose why I was struggling so much as a father, why I didn't understand the inner relationship between kingdom mission and family. It's why when the missionary movement launched, 100 years ago, that Christian families and missionaries that were going overseas would put their kids into boarding school and saw their families primarily as an impediment to mission, as opposed to an integrated part of the mission. So we made a lot of mistakes because as Christians, we decided to adopt this modern experimental family structure along with the rest of the culture. And that's been an unfortunate decision that I think we need to rethink.
First impression, I'm just like in my mind, some of it, and I'm not like defending it. Some of what you say hits the, like, I inherited this mindset from my grandpa, grew up, like from LA. He's passed away. He's that silent generation. Pull yourself up from your bootstraps. And that's what he had to do. And then I think from that, like, I was very adamant of, like, the day I turned 18, like, I've got to get out of the home and I've got to prove that I can, like, part of being a man is making it on my own after 18, which I did. Like, I slept on a basement floor in a sleeping bag for 6 months just to, like, get ahead to get out. And I remember sharing one time with a friend in Central America, like, that's kind of the American stereotype, if you will, an expectation. And I know that's not happening as much anymore with Gen Z, but right. And he was just, like, stunned, like, heartbroken of, like, he could never imagine to have 18 been expected to leave and become, self-sustaining, independent. So some of what you're saying does feel like it goes against everything I've heard and been taught of, even what it almost feels like to be a man from when I was, like, shifting out of high school into young adulthood. I don't know if that resonates at all or if you run into that.
Same 100%. Same with me.
Okay.
Yeah. For most of human history, kicking your kids out at 18 would be a death sentence. Today it's considered, hey, congratulations, welcome to adulthood. Now, it's not a death sentence in our culture because we live in an insanely wealthy culture. And so we don't understand how unique the experience is. And as we have more, like, economic challenges, we start to encounter a more reality, like, as life has been lived for thousands of years. The idea of the classical family, that the family was actually designed to work together. And that, as you see throughout Scripture, the idea is that fathers and sons are working together. Like, every story in Scripture has that element to it, whether it's Abraham and Isaac or David and Solomon, or all the parables Jesus told, the prodigal son, or the tenant farmers who sends his son, it's always that way. It's always been that way, that this was the design. And that if somehow there was a rupture, like happened between Abraham and Terah, between generations, it was a huge tragedy and a massive danger for that next generation. Are they going to survive? Right. And so that's the way that family has been. I think we're going to end up getting back to that world likely in the future. But we did have really what the Industrial Revolution did is it unlocked enormous amounts of wealth, and it allowed us to think about what the family is differently, who the individual is differently, and so it's really has had a lot of positive effects as well. Like, if you want to pursue as an individual your artistic, expressions, or you want to start a business, or you want to do a lot of these things. There's a lot going for you in this new world we've created, but it has been really hard on the family. And so I think, and we haven't really taken a big step back and looked at that. And I think as Christians, we have a theology of family in the Bible. Like we actually have in the Bible, God, when he created the first family, he gave us the mission statement. Like he told us exactly why he did it in the very first chapter of the book of Genesis. When God created the first family, he says to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule over creation. Well, one of the things you can easily deduce from that mission, that 5-part mission statement, is what the family is and what God designed the family to be. Like, for example, he gave them a mission that could not be accomplished in a single generation, right? He tells them to fill the earth. You can't do that. Adam and Eve couldn't do that by themselves, right? So the essence of the family is multi-generational. He gave it to them, not to one of them. So the essence of family has always been to work together as a team. And then he gave them this mission, right? To bring his presence to the ends of the earth. And then that is recast in the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations. Well, that's a mission that he gave to the family, to this multi-generational team. And so what happens, though, in a Christian culture when we decided to adopt a secular idea of family and we're no longer multi-generational teams? We're really individuals pursuing mission as individuals, pursuing identity as individuals, pursuing work as individuals. Like, what does that do to the family? And is that just as good as doing this collectively as multi-generational families? Is this better? And the kind of implicit assumption is it's better because we worship individualism in Western culture. And so we love the idea of getting more and more freedom from the family, more and more freedom for the individual. Like David Brooks says, when Americans become wealthy, they purchase loneliness. And we have this massive loneliness epidemic, and people don't seem to understand even where that came from. Like, how did this happen? Why are old people dying alone in nursing homes? Why are children thrown into daycare and neglected at scales we've never seen in human history? Like, why is this happening? It just seems so strange. Why is divorce higher than it's ever been? Why are there more single parent families than we've ever seen in history, and that there are more in our country than any other country in the world? Like, why? What is happening? And we're not having this conversation. Why is fertility in the West? It's below replacement rate in every single country in the entire world. Every Western developed nation, we have a massive population collapse happening. People don't want to have children anymore because they see themselves as individuals. There's only one exception to that. There's only one developed nation in the world that doesn't have a fertility problem, and that's the country of Israel, because they still have chosen to follow the Bible's idea of family. That's their one reason. They are Abrahamic. That's why I spent a lot of time researching this in Israel, asking Jewish fathers, what are you guys thinking? Like, why do you guys have so many kids? Why? And if you go to Israel, one of the really bizarre things that I encountered was that men were more excited to have kids than even women. Like, these fathers were extremely passionate about their multi-generational families. They were so passionate about where they came from, their roots, their connections with their fathers and their grandfathers. And if you study, and as I did, like where they got that whole cultural idea from and why it is persisting in the face of modern abundance and post all of the changes in the Industrial Revolution, they'll tell you in one word why they think about family this way. And the word they use always is Abraham. They believe that Abraham symbolically describes the idea of fatherhood, and that they are given divine revelation from God in the book of Genesis. The ideas that God had around fatherhood and family, that Abraham's decision to, like, his value to cry out to God for a multi-generational family. This is something that Jewish fathers do all the time. This is a normal part of Jewish culture. I never even saw it before in Christian culture, yet we have the same Bible, we have the same patriarch in our scriptures, and there has been a decision to ignore what the Bible has to say about family and choose to replace that with a secular vision of fatherhood as the sort of, I call the present playful father. That's the current kind of trend of fatherhood. We experiment with fatherhood and family the way we experiment with diets in the West, right? It's just like whatever new fad, whatever we're excited about, whatever values are on the ascendancy, they'll just kind of reshape how we think about all these things. And so we as believers, we have to have these concepts tethered to divine revelation and objective truth. And they're also beautifully tethered to these deep images, these stories in the scripture. And so it took me, just as a father who was growing up very Western, wasn't excited to be a dad. I didn't know about these concepts. I really wanted to follow Jesus. I really wanted to see his kingdom come. I wanted to make disciples. Like this is the heartbeat of my life, but I couldn't understand how family interacted with that passion to follow Christ and to make disciples. Like these two concepts to me were actually in some kind of tension, and they existed almost in two realms. And I felt like I was actually being selfish to want to have children if it were meant that I was going to make less disciples. And I was really conflicted about these two concepts. And so that's part of my story is really encountering these more ancient ideas brought together, like these two great passions that we, and callings that all of us have from scripture, to build these families and to multiply disciple makers. Like this is my life. And I think they beautifully intertwine, but they don't with the modern Western family. So I had to kind of overcome or work through, a lot of my beliefs about family to see these two, great missions actually intertwine and integrate with one another.
Yeah. I feel like you just shared so much. My head is spinning because I'm, for anyone listening, like I'm into Bitcoin. So there's this, like, you look at fiat systems and you look at inflation, and then you're looking at hyperinflation, and having traveled all around the world, and you begin to kind of look at these systems that we have that are broken, that tend to, like, you're saving in something that's constantly losing value, and people don't understand that.
Right. And
then where I'm getting with that is it actually feels tied into the American system,
right,
which then reinforces a lot of some of the stuff that I feel you shared. There's the Make America Healthy Again, the Maha movement. Some of this stuff is related to that, and like I mean, now we have issues with fertility rates anyway, with all of there's so many things we can go into, right. But you mentioned birth rate, and people not wanting to have kids anymore. This is a major issue. And that feels, there's different reasons. I think one is just the value of having family anymore. A loss of that value. So that's a thread. The daycare thing, my wife's recently gotten into Montessori. And so we've learned a ton, because we have a 2 and 4-year-old, about development and and then being at home, yes, or being in environments, but not just thrown into daycare or preschool, and actually the research behind that. And then you see the homeschool movement happening. And then, I mean, it'd be fun to talk about college, but like, there's so many things that we could talk into. There's all this culture. Hopefully I just highlighted some of the, like, right. There's a lot of culture discussion we could have. It's going to be hard for me. I want to shift it back onto the spiritual side for the sake of this podcast.
Yeah.
But so pushing it there on the spiritual side. I don't feel that I saw I'll tell you what, the first time I saw a family really, I feel like, do discipleship well, like parents with their children, was when I went to visit a missionary family, and I saw the parents discipling their kids, and I saw the level of trust and respect the kids had for their parents spiritually. And I saw them worshiping and praying together. I saw them reading the Bible and as a family, and the kids were just asking questions. And it was like, I didn't know this could happen. Yeah. It just changed my entire, like, for me, that was maybe like your Israel moment. Like, it was like, there's something different that can be had for families in discipleship. And then they were doing mission together. They were like going to villages together, but the kids had this ownership of, this is what we do, not what my parents do.
Yes.
I'd never seen that in my life, not even with PKs, that kind of stuff in the States, pastors' kids. And so I realized that for me set a new bar. And then when I look at, like, now I'm mid-30s, I've got kids. I was on staff at a church, and once we had kids, like, the environment that we were in was kind of like, hey, if kids cry, someone's probably going to come up and invite you to leave, escort you out of the service. And then once kids got big enough, it's like they're just in nursery the entire time, or then they go to kids. And my wife and I realized, like, we want our family with us. We want to disciple our kids. We actually want our kids to learn how to worship and pray with us from seeing us, not just on Sundays, but even on Sundays. And we realized that world was missing. And I guess when I think about church environment, I love the church, and I know that you love the church, but I think we've got to, like, I wonder how much of our church model, like you've talked about now, has been influenced by this Western culture, and there's pros and cons. I mean, some of this is why America is, the reserve currency of the world, and why we are a leading nation in the world. But then there's other, downfalls to that we see, and I think we're feeling now. And when I think about church world, I'm going to hand back to you with this, is like, I feel like everything in the church world throughout most churches, not any one church, has been very like, you come to service, you put your kids over here. You go to a small group and your kids go over here. If you lead a small group, like everything is, your parents are separated from your kids.
Yes.
I was a youth pastor, and I realized I can't disciple these people's kids if they're already at this place spiritually. It's like something already has disconnected in people's homes. And by the time they're teenagers, it's almost too late. It's not too late. It's just, you're going to have, most kids have made up what they believe by age 13. But I guess on that side, like where, if you were to juxtapose like the, church kind of culture and model with separating kids from parents, and the model that you're speaking of, like how would you maybe show those two side by side, and what we mostly see versus what maybe we could hope for and hope to see?
Yeah. Well, the model of church that we currently are primarily working out in the West is an attempt to reform the 4th century church. So there was something that happened in the 4th century when Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire that needed to be reformed, right, by the Reformation that happened in the 14th century. But we've continued that experiment without actually going back to first principles to the 1st century. And so the very few of our church models are actually looking at 1st century church. I've spent the last 25 years trying to restore like 1st century practices of church, and I slammed into this enormous problem. So what a lot of people think happened in in Acts was that it was almost like when the Holy Spirit came and the church got constituted there in Jerusalem, that the disciples got together and said, okay, guys, what model of church do you think would be good? What do you think we should do? Should we do mega church? Should we do house church? But that conversation never happened, because what actually was going on in the 1st century was this thing that doesn't exist anymore called the household, in Greek, the oikos. Mm. And this was a group of 20 to 30 people centered around a single family that was this powerful economic and governmental unit of the 1st century. They already, before the gospel came, before the Holy Spirit came, they already were doing their spiritual life, their economic life, and even their civic life primarily through the oikos, through the household. This was not just Jewish families, but the Romans as well. If you actually read Roman law, there was this position within the government called the patros familia, which is the head of the family. The father of everybody was a part of one of these oikoses. And that father, the head of that family, had enormous civic responsibility for everything happening in that household. And he had all kinds of laws that governed what was going on inside of that household. Well, when the Holy Spirit came and just erupted in the church during the 1st century, you had all these households everywhere that were already functioning like mini churches before the gospel came. They already, in the Jewish context, were doing Passover together, Sabbath together. That father was leading his family spiritually already. And this was also true in the Roman world. The primary expression of religion in the Roman pagan world was also in the household. They had these hearth fires that they had to keep burning all of the time. And there was all kinds of religious rituals that were being done inside the household of these Roman families. So this was the context of the religious world in the 1st century. So when the Holy Spirit came and you had the eruption of the church, you really had this sort of, it started to go through households, and these oikoses were converting as households. And so that's why you have this weird phenomenon that happened in the 1st century. You have more explicit examples of household salvations than individual salvations in the book of Acts. And even as Paul is traveling on his missionary journeys, he's primarily telling you the oikos that was sort of the central a hub through which he was doing ministry. So he'd say, Gaius, Crispus, Philemon, all these guys were these fathers of these households. And Cornelius, of course, famously, who came to faith with his household when Peter came, the first Gentile household to come into the kingdom. And so this was sort of the structure, the infrastructure of the early church. So, and in the New Testament, when the word church, ecclesia, is used, about a third of the time it's used to refer to an oikos, right? You have in Romans 16 where Paul says, greet the church or the ecclesia that meets in your oikos. So that's a very common, use of the word ecclesia in the New Testament. The second is the ecclesia of the city, right? So this is, of course, when Jesus is writing the letters to the seven ecclesias across these seven different churches, or when Paul's writing to Ephesus. And then, of course, you have the use of ecclesia for, all believers everywhere. When Jesus says, on this rock, I will build my ecclesia. So these are the three uses: household, city, and universal church. These are the three uses. When we say the word church in English, in the modern day, we're not referring to, 99% of the time, we're not referring to any of those three. We're referring to something that's larger than the household, but smaller than the city, this branded worship service ministry that is designed to gather people. And I think it is an expression of the church. It's just important to say that it is an attempt at restoring a church model that really emerged in the 4th century and then got reformed. The church didn't get reformed very much during the Reformation. Primarily our theology got reformed. And now we're really trying to reform that 4th century church increasingly. And we're always sort of syncretizing it with modern kind of like trends, like individualism, and doing exactly what you described, which is to break everybody up by life groups, because that's what we do throughout our culture. We don't. But the problem is, I have this conviction that's, fairly unique to me. I don't know if those of you guys listening to this, or Alex, what you think of this, but I really think ecclesiology, an understanding of the church, is actually downstream from theology of family. And that if you don't understand what the family is, you'll never get to a first principle or a first century ecclesiology. And this is the reason why house church movements are really struggle, in my opinion. What happens to so many house church movements is they don't have the oikos. There's no household. They don't have these first century households to work with, right? Because so we tried this for about 5 or 6 years. We tried to plant house churches, and we constantly saw this cycle, which was that the host family would burn out because that husband and wife as a unit was not used to being a team at all. They weren't doing economically productive activity. They weren't doing lots and lots of discipleship and spiritual rhythms in the home on a regular basis. This was all new to them. They were primarily living their lives as individuals. They go off in their individual lives, and then they would try to somehow carry the weight of this church, and this community that was coming into existence. And so sometimes it would work, but I would say for us, about 80% of the time that couple would burn out after, some as quickly as 6 months, some could last for 2 or 3 years. But we just kept watching this cycle happen over and over again. And so we started asking this question: can you restore a household-based expression of church without the existence of households? Can you get a first century expression of the church without the first century household? And we really studied that problem for like a year, because I was like, please don't tell me you have to have that, because that is such an expensive decision. Like, that doesn't exist anymore. Like, I didn't grow up in a first century household. I traveled the Middle East to understand what these things were like. And so if there's any way to restore a biblical ecclesiology without restoring the household, that would be awesome, because this is like, I don't even know where you'd start. And so we tried for years, and eventually we came to the conclusion about 20 years ago, and this is when we started family teams, was we actually started to believe you have to have, if you want to see a first century kind of church emerge, you need these households again. And so that's why we started we started to slowly train families to shift their whole understanding of what a family is, from this sort of nest version of family to a team. And that's kind of using, kind of modern language to describe the movement from Western family to first century household. And so we started to train families how to function like multi-generational teams. This is why we live in a 4-generation house. This is why we start many businesses as a family. We coach all of our kids. That's why when our kids turn 18, they're just joining the family team at that point. I mean, it's not like, we're not kicking them out. Like, all of our kids, we work together, we live together, and, we're having kids. We're all helping each other economically. We're helping each other with ministry. We're all a part of the same oikos. Because this is what we think needs to be restored. If we can't do this, then we're going to continue to suffer with these fragile Western families. But the real problem that I have with this is, man, this is really bad for the kingdom and for discipleship, because because now instead of actually coming into a household and experiencing what you experience, Alex, and that, seeing that family, I mean, that changed your life. I have likewise had those experiences. That's a very different kind of experience than the discipling an individual, like bringing somebody and giving them the experience of what it's like to see a father and a mother, a son and a daughter, a functioning, and what that does, not because these are archetypes of spiritual realities. God is a father, Jesus is a son. The church is designed to be siblings within a household oikos structure. And there's a great book called When the Church Was a Family. And it's a scholar who explored what first century sibling relationships were like to try to understand when the early church used this language of brother and sister. It was like mind blowing to people in a sort of strong family culture, because these sibling bonds were extremely powerful in the first century. Where today, of course, siblings are almost like rivals in family, and we oftentimes just launch from each other and don't really continue to have deep connections with siblings in our culture. So all of these ideas of discipleship and community and church are all lost to us. And so we're just we're using words. We're saying brother and sister in the church. We call people elders. We have no idea what that means in the first century. We even say father and mother. We're not acting like fathers and mothers. We don't know what those roles actually mean. We call this thing a family, but we don't know what a family is. And so all of these things, because the church was really designed to be a family of families, it was designed to really reflect a biblical sort of family ideas, and to start to offer that to more and more people, to create a spiritual household out of these physical households. Without the physical households, now we're just untethered and reinventing things. Now we're just making stuff up, and that's kind of what I see is happening. And man, it's not working out well for us.
Hey friend, we're going to jump right back into this discussion about discipleship and disciple making. But before we jump in, let me just highlight ordinarymovement.com, because that is the reason that I have been able to provide this podcast in the first place. There's this whole community and a movement of disciple making where we've basically taken this entire process of discipleship. We've distilled it into a group model, taking people through 26 sessions. We have a men's track, a women's track, and we have a track that can fit in just for men and women together. It fits into church structures with small groups. It also fits into a person's daily life, where even if they've never even been in a small group and their churches don't have small groups, they don't even know where to begin. It is for the local church and meant to be done with and through your local church, but it is also designed for ordinary men and ordinary women. And it was designed by ordinary men and ordinary women. And so anyone, be a roofer, an entrepreneur, a business person, a stay-at-home mom, a waiter, whatever level of education you have or don't have, it doesn't matter. We've taken all the guesswork out of how do you bring together people and learn how to follow Jesus together in a high challenge, high grace environment that helps people become disciples who make disciples. And it's all available to you. Check it out at ordinarymovement.com. All right, back to the show. I like X, formerly Twitter. My wife likes TikTok. Yeah. One of the trends that we see on TikTok is people are starting to share that like the parents they thought they would be grandparents, like great grandparents, are now kind of like they like it's there's even a big shift, like with the boomer generation who would be this new, I guess, generation of grandparents. Like their definition of what it means to be a grandparent versus babysitter, very different than it was for their parents. And we're hearing and seeing that from so many people. Again, the youth pastor in me, like I saw this. I saw the mindset of parents on just sending their kids to church and Sunday school, thinking that we would do the job spiritually, but there wasn't discipleship happening at home. And I guess if I were to if someone's listening, you're not taught, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you're not talking about enabling the classic millennial. It's not millennial anymore. It's although there are still some, or Gen Z, to just live at home in the basement and not go to work.
No, it's the opposite. Okay. They're coming into their inheritance. That's a huge difference. Like I would say that there's almost like they're almost polar opposites. So the failure to launch problem that Western people are struggling with a lot, because they've enabled their children and their children don't know what it's like to be a part of a team, and they're really used to being coddled. That's on one side. Then there's the launch culture, which is like, go off, do your thing. You're not going to starve because we live in this wealthy culture. Go figure it out. Go into debt and figured out the way I did, but I kind of need to be done with responsibility because I really am excited about being, this empty nest and get to finally spend money and time on myself. That's kind of in the middle.
Okay.
What I'm saying is let your children come into their inheritance. Like you have been handed a multi-generational legacy from who knows how many different generations to come to hand it to you, to then hold that and say, I'm going to hoard that. I'm going to enjoy that. You kids go off. Good luck. May the force be with you. Like that's what we do today. And so I want my sons and my daughters to come into their inheritance. That's not the same as a failure to launch. This is like, how much more could we possibly accomplish if we did this together? Like if we took all that multi-generational wisdom, all the resources that we've been handed and we've been cultivating, and now instead of saying, let's just hit the reset button, or why don't you guys just, stay coddled and children for the rest of your life? No, the whole idea here is that my ceiling needs to be your floor. Your job is to take the family to the next level. But the only way you're going to do that is if I give you your inheritance. I give you the wisdom from the generations, right? If my ceiling is going to be your floor, you got to start from where I left off, not start over. And that's really the tragedy of our culture, because we assume individualism. And then when you see a kid move back into the home who might be coming into his inheritance and really beginning to do what our kids are doing, which they're having kids. Like if you want to see kids that are not coddled and not entitled, there's a really easy way to tell, in my opinion. And that is if they immediately start having children. Like, so we have 3 kids who are all married. They all immediately start having children. We are all excited because we know that part of our mission is to be fruitful and multiply. Like, it's not easy having kids. Raising little kids is not being entitled. To provide for that family, to raise those kids, we fully embrace that. But we really hope and we desire, and all of our kids are so excited to have large families, but they're going to need a lot of help. Like, you get married young and then start having kids right away. Like, that's going to take a team to figure out how to overcome the kind of economic and physical challenges and spiritual challenges that are going to be created by doing that. And that's why you get to have this. That's why we spent 18, 20 years cultivating a relationship with you, so that we're now ready to partner with you in dynamic ways as you take on the full responsibility of creating a household yourself. Like, we need to really work together to figure this out, because that's a lot of work.
So you I mean, ultimately it requires someone, I feel like this is, I mean, there's certain marriages where it's more like egalitarian, complementarian. I think this can work either way, but ultimately both people need to buy in. I know you're going to speak probably stronger to a husband to lead,
Right. Yep.
But I think whether people operate as a team or more in that traditional kind of style, it works either way. I guess what I'm getting at though is like you right, like you as Jeremy, as a leader of your family, you're having to say family as a team is a value, and what I hear is you're cultivating in the areas of spiritually speaking for your family and discipleship, and taking ownership of the discipleship of your home and the missional disciple making, which I want to get into. And then you're also saying, for the sake of your kids, because you love them, you're thinking not just about these areas, because holistically, like if we're going to mentor people and disciple people, you can't only care about the spiritual, right? We've got to care about the emotional, the physical, probably more to that. There's like the 5 capitals, right?
Yes.
And what I hear you saying though is then you're also taking ownership of setting your kids up for success, then to have an inheritance to run with and work with. And maybe they choose, because of a passion or an interest, to launch out and do a different business venture, different pursuit. They want to be a neurosurgeon. Like, that's fine. But you've taken an ownership of giving them something to work, is what I hear.
Right.
And I think for people listening, maybe I feel like I have some of the business background in common with you, not to your scale at all, but I've seen enough business people do this with families. I think where maybe people would struggle to get vision for this, and I might have a thought on how, but I'd like to hear from you. Like, what about the 9-to-5 commuting family? What does this look like for them? And maybe we can kind of like, there's some of the capitals, like spiritually, on the business side or wealth side. Like there's a lot that we're unpacking. I want to make sure we get into the disciple making. How can we do family as team on mission? But I think I don't think you're going to be thinking about mission really well unless you already have some of this base covered a little bit. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong. So let's talk like ordinary families, 9 to 5. They're working, office jobs, commuting, whatever. Can you give me kind of some thoughts on what this could look like for them?
Yeah. So there are tools, and you have to be extremely careful when you are in a 9 to 5 kind of work life system to find tools to make sure you're maximizing the opportunities that you have with evenings, weekends, and if there are any opportunities of integrating into work. Those are all tools that we talk a lot about to try to figure out how to continue to function like a team. So yes, I can do a very deep dive into ways of handling 9 to 5, or even people that are on, like much more difficult shift schedules, like police officers and firefighters. We've done, lots of deep dives into how to design rhythms. I do always want to separate that conversation from the ideal, which is for most people, when they chose, the reason why they're in a 9 to 5 is that a career counselor, when they were in college, didn't come to them and say, hey, so they probably didn't ask, or wasn't asked by the counselor, would you like to create the kind of career path that's going to maximize integration with your family as you get older? Like, nobody's asked that. Now, that's the number one question I ask young people when they're deciding career paths. I'm like, how can we make sure that as you are succeeding in your career, your life as a family team is getting stronger and more integrated over time? The typical careers will do the opposite. The more success, the more responsibility you bear, the less integrated you are with your family. And that is devastating to a multi-generational family, because right as your grandchildren are coming online, you're in your busiest, least integrated, and least flexible season of your entire life. That is not healthy, and that's not a good design. So I always talk to people in their 20s very differently than people who are committed to long-term 9 to 5 life. Yeah. But if you are committed and you feel like this is a calling, you're a neurosurgeon, you're like, I've already put, the 8 years of, education into this career path, and I'm not going to change now. I get really, really aggressive with how you steward your evenings and weekends to make sure that you're designing a rhythm for your family, both weekly and annually, to maximize your experience as a family team, because you have to be extremely precious about those times. And if you start doing all of these hyper individualistic things, like all your kids are in different sports and you're all going different directions when you go to church, that's not going to work. Like you're taking the very precious few hours left that are under your care, and you're abdicating the responsibility to steward that time and handing it over to the pastor, to the coach, and to the teacher. And that's kind of what we're taught to do culturally. Yeah. And so you got to take that time back. If you wanted your kids to be in sports, try an all family team sport. This is something I've explored with lots of families. We did it. Lots of families have done it. We've done iterations where if we're going to do something with that precious time, we're going to do it together. How do we think about ministry or church in a integrated way? So if we're going to be going to some place on Sunday, I'm certainly not going to watch my family if we're scattering to different directions, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, resting on Saturday, and then we're scattering again on Sunday. No, another big part of our story is designing a 24-hour day of rest. You have to decide if you're going to do that. That's a pretty dynamic thing to do in this culture, where especially if you're 9 to 5, you're like, well, I desperately need that time to be completely available to all the different, birthday parties and sporting events and, all the housework we have to do. And so the idea of actually keeping a Sabbath, which I think is completely optional, Paul made that clear. Like, we don't judge each other based on the keeping of a Sabbath. Jesus perfectly kept the Sabbath so that we don't have to. Yeah. But man, he also said that Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, there's something about the Sabbath that man needs. Mankind, human beings, are designed to work 6 days and rest 1 day. And I think there's a lot you can do if you're a 9 to 5 person, if you choose to start to lean into taking a Sabbath, to make sure that you're having an immersive family experience while you are fully resting, fully recovering, spiritually, physically, soul rest, body rest, family cohesion. So that takes time. It's not easy to pull that off, especially with young kids and, busy lives, but you do have to be intentional about it. And so this is another thing that we do very deep dives in, like training people to, over the course of 12 months, learn how to really take a day of rest that actually does all of those things. Those are the kinds of things I really want to encourage people to do that are no matter who you are, but especially if you're working a 9 to 5.
So I think my friends Josh and Janine are doing the family teams venture with you guys, if I'm not mistaken. They're involved in a couple of things, but that's how I found you. We connected. So what is the website? I know, like, for anyone listening, if you want to check out what Jeremy, like, this is, it's very in depth and it's nuanced based on your season of life. You guys have helped people kind of figure this out a little bit. What's the name of the website if people want to learn more on that?
Yeah. So we kind of have these two worlds. So familyteams.com is if all the family stuff is like, you want to go deeper, you can jump over there. And yeah, we've got a lot of tools there, like you're saying, Alex. And then our ministry side, once a family is a team and they want to like really maximize discipleship, evangelism, and community life in and through an oikos, a household, we have another website called 1000 Houses or 1kh.org. That's where we coach people in disciple making, evangelism, and community through the house. But oftentimes the pathway for a lot of people is they'll start in family teams, really try to recover from this Western idea of family, really begin to restore this biblical idea of family, this household idea. But once you do that, you're like, well, how does this look like in sort of ministry? And I don't know what that looks like. But if you want to explore those things, yeah, we start to do that over at 1KH.
Okay. Man, I have a lot of thoughts. I feel like for those listening, it may be helpful for them to take reflection on, like, if they were to pause this right now, consider, based on the trajectory of their own, immediate family, let alone their kids, like, what do they want their family to look and feel like in 20 years from now? And then where do they think they would be if they didn't make a change? Yeah. I know, like, our whole family, my mom, sisters, nephews, we all do this massive beach vacation every year. Awesome. And that's a privilege that we get to do. But we all get together and love doing holidays together. I throw that out there because there's so many families now that I'm running into who no longer have that family unit to do holidays with. And I think if someone were listening now, you may already be there. I know that there is grace to rebuild this family unit, but I think what Jeremy's presenting is, like, there's this opportunity now to stop and fix, especially while your kids are younger, and to have an ideal to aim for. And I think you're going to get way closer to the ideal by aiming than not doing the effort at all. Yes. If you're listening to this podcast and you're like, why the heck are we talking about family? And we've talked about rhythms and time management and business and inheritance. So I guess I just feel like it'd be helpful for anyone listening. The reason we're going back to some of that is what Jeremy was saying is, as he was trying to help families in their own discipleship for the sake of mission, get to mission, first you've got to get into discipleship. And what he found was that if these other areas were not already developed, there wasn't the platform for mission together as a family. Is that right, Jeremy?
100%. That's what got us here. Yep.
Yeah. So if you're listening, you're like, I want my family to do kingdom building together, then you've got to go back and do some of this work over here to get to the kingdom building over there, because it's all integrated, is what I hear you saying. Right. Yes. Okay. So another thought on what you shared, Jeremy. So, like, starting young, someone listening now in your 20s, if someone's listening and you're not in your 20s and you're a parent or a grandparent, like, you could hand this to the person in their 20s and it could change your family tree for forever, generations. And then for the person listening, like, it may be way more work for you now to begin implementing these rhythms and to learn this and do this. And it may be an uphill battle, but you're not going to see the results unless you do the uphill battle and the hard work now, even if it's late in life, right?
100%.
You're probably familiar with Dave Ramsey, right? Like, when I was 18, my dad died when I was younger. Like, I didn't have financial literacy, neither did she at all. We'd lost money in different things. And she just handed me a Dave Ramsey book and was like, Alex, do what he says and you'll be a millionaire. She's like, she didn't even understand money. Like, she did not know. But her handing me that book at 18 changed my life and my kids' lives. And, we got to baby step 7. I'm now managing our family estate. As a result, we've been able to set her up to retire. And it allows us now, like, my wife and I are very focused on bigger kingdom things because we're healthier financially. And I feel like in my own story, what I hear you saying, Jeremy, is this could be like one of those moments for someone listening where if they were to hand this to even, they're say, hey, we're going to try to figure this out now, but if I give this to you while you're young enough, you could get this.
Yeah.
Like it's game changing for a family to live on mission for Jesus.
Yes.
Does that sound right? Am I off base?
No, 100%. I think you have to be clear about what your generation is going to restore. So that story you just told, Alex, is that it's like, okay, my generation is going to restore financial literacy to this family line. That's awesome. And man, that's a hard work, because when you start to function that way, when you start to like treat money the way that Ramsey's describing, it's not muscle memory to you. It's all foreign, and you have to like implement this stuff intentionally. Like it takes a lot of work. It's going to be much more obvious to your kids and your grandkids than it was to you. Well, this is true about everything. Like you have to be clear in your generation what it took us generations to see like these things get kind of corrupted over time. It's going to take generations to restore all these things.
Yeah.
And so you have to be okay with, okay, God, what do you have for me in this generation? So one of the things that I'm really trying to make sure that we restore generationally, because my parents did a great job. There's a lot of things they restored. They took the baton and took it much further and passed it to me. They had a very amazing ministry, like focus in our lives as a household. As a family, but there was a lot of things that we still needed to restore. So I'm working on those things. You know, those are things that my wife and I are working on. And there's all kinds of things we didn't restore that we're watching our kids, restore in their generations. And so this is the beautiful work of making sure that every generation is leveling up. And so don't ever get discouraged. This is the problem. Oftentimes we look at somebody who starts at third. We're sitting at first base. We don't realize that they're starting at third. We think, there's something wrong with me, because you're comparing yourself to somebody else. And so don't compare yourself to some other family. Compare yourself to your family. Like, where were you a generation ago? Are you leveling up the family in this generation? And are your kids being positioned in such a way to level up the family in the next generation? We got a lot of stuff to restore. There's lots of great restoration projects for every single part of the family. But yeah, don't get discouraged by the fact that there's a lot of work to do. That's actually a blessing, and that's part of what we get to do. And this is the whole process of what Jesus came to allow us to do in the kingdom, is to restore all these things, to make all things new.
Yeah. And kind of like my mom handing me that book, that she didn't know how to do it, but she knew it was the thing. Like, as a result, we got into it. And I think there's that, as a family unit, you'd see that like a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
So okay, cool. So then casting vision, then like family on mission. You're saying it starts with discipleship. You're saying it starts with even a mindset and restructuring of like what is family and how to do family better.
Yeah.
So let's talk then. Let's talk a little bit about family on mission, like family as team on mission, making disciples. Like, can you share some vision of what that can look like?
Yeah. So if we're a multi-generational team on mission, it's so important for us to be like aware of what is the mission. And, there's really two buckets that I think about mission fall into. There's the general mission, and then there's like kind of specific mission. So general mission is, there's really two places where we're given a very clear mandate. Genesis 1:28 and Matthew 28, right? So Genesis 1:28, it says to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule. So we are all about that five-part mission as a family. We're fruitful when we have children. We multiply when we have grandchildren. We fill when we are identifying geographical regions that our family is called to be in and to fill in. Subduing is all about taking control of the influential elements of that culture, whether they be businesses, ministries, serving those things, starting those things. And then the last thing is to rule, to actually govern at that local level, governing ministries, eldering, things like that. So that five-part mission, we're all about all of our kids. We all care. We track those things. We talk about those five things. And then in Matthew 28, Jesus says, look, okay, Genesis 1 was, that mission was given in a context of a perfect world, but then the fall happened, right? We have Genesis 1, but then Genesis 3 occurred, where, we have all kinds of problems with the fact that we have to retake the world. And so when Jesus said, all authority has been given to me now, so go and make disciples of all nations, it's the same mandate, right? So we're told to be fruitful, which is to make disciples, to multiply, to make disciple makers, right? To fill, which is this idea that we go to all nations, to subdue, which is to do this process of helping them obey the king, right? Teaching them to obey everything I've commanded. And of course, ruling is Jesus himself is the king. He is Lord. And so as people are coming into the kingdom and being discipled, they are following Jesus and being ruled under his kingdom. His kingdom exists wherever his rule and reign is being reflected and followed. So that's the general mission. Everybody has those two elements to their mission. And we're all kind of tracking and understanding, are we doing the Great Commission and are we doing the family mandate? And then over here, you have like unique missions, these are things that like your spiritual gifts, like places that God has decided to put into your life, past events or even struggles you've gone through or trials you've gone through. So if you've got a special needs child in your family, you probably have a special mission or mandate in the kingdom of God in that area, right? So if you have like a spiritual gift, like, both Alex and I think we both think architecturally. And so there's a part of our mission that's going to be unique in that way. We're going to have these kinds of conversations. This is not for everybody. Not everybody's going to care about like, okay, let's get back to first principles, when it comes to all these things. But that's a way that I think, Alex, both your household, your family, my family are going to operate at that level. That's just a unique mission to our family. It's not necessarily for everybody. So it's just understanding what are those unique gifts. Every time a child is born into your family, it opens the door to that unique mission getting an added component. Like God blesses your family with an incredible musician. Like that's going to affect the family mission. If one of your kids gets really passionate about a certain country and learns a foreign language, that's going to change and affect the family's mission. So in a really good way, it's going to expand that place from which we can reach. So those are some ideas for how we think about mission.
How has it looked like practically for you? Like how are you guys disciple making together as a family? With knowing that context, you guys have your gifts, your strengths, your background. What does it look like for you?
Yeah. So everybody in our family, we engage in an annual strategic process of launching disciple making. So we do this with our household and our household church. So everyone in our church, we call it a disciple making community, and we don't use the word church very often because it confuses people based on the fact that word has been changed a lot. So we call it disciple making community. And so from October to January every year, everyone sort of submits their plan for 2025. How are we going to make disciples? How are we going to be discipled? And so in my case, I've committed to starting 2 groups, 3 guys each, that I'm going to be pouring myself into in 5 months. And these are very intense. I take them off on a retreat. I do like lots of training. We do Discovery Bible study together the whole time. I do one-on-one coaching with each of those 3 guys. So there's a particular blueprint that we use from 1KH that we take people through. So my wife, she's also committed. So she's going to be making 6. She's going to take on 6 apprentices in 2025. So she has 2 groups of 3. So she's working on her group right now. This particular group, we have a large national network that we're connected to. So there are these ladies that we've known for these families, amazing families in different parts of the country. So she's actually going to be traveling to these 4 ladies, their houses. They're going to come here next week and do like an immersive to launch their disciple making journey with April. Then she's going to go with apprentices of like our daughters or other apprentices into their context in Colorado, California, different places. This is part of just our family because we have a larger network.
Yeah.
My daughter, Kelsey, so she just started a group. One of the people she's discipling in that group is my daughter, Kyra, who's 16. So Kelsey's 25. So yeah, everybody, like we insist everybody be on mission. We have a very clear, we decided to completely eliminate the how problem. So many people are like, I would make disciples if I knew how. Like that problem does not exist. We're like, here's a blueprint. You don't have to use ours, but you have to use one. If you have a how problem, use ours. All right, here it is. Here are some ways to do it. We know this works. We know we can make this sustainable. You could do one of these this year. If you're getting pregnant or exhausted, like pick a 3 or 4 or 5 month season. That's the best, but don't say no to the king when he commands us to go and make disciples. And part of what we have had to train our community, our household in is this is our number one rhythm. So there's a lot of things that people are, saying like, go to the worship service, come to the gathering, go to a small group. So these things are all really helpful, but we always say, look, the number one thing is you gotta be on mission. Like you gotta be a part of the movement. You gotta either be being discipled by somebody, which is part of the mission, like have a season where you're just poured into and you apprentice under somebody. But then make sure that you are also giving out. So you're being trained to go off and make disciples. So that's how we do it in our community.
What I'm hearing is traditional church model wasn't allowing you to do disciple making as a family on mission. as a team, because you would go and you would all split up and someone was doing the disciple making and you were attending. And so you decided, you and your family shifted to, we're going to do disciple making, not attend. That ended up being not through leading a traditional church. It could be, I guess, but it's through a house church and a network that you're in. So then you guys are already disciple making together as you do church and as you're also leading a network. And then I hear you saying that you're now tying in everybody's special interests with kind of outreach and further disciple making. So it's kind of a, like, when you do church, you are disciple making, you're not attending. And then you're just helping people connect the dots with interests and passions for either outreach or disciple making further in ways that they can use those strengths or passions or interests to glorify God and maybe reach new people. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we're multiplying our children physically in training them. We're multiplying disciples, right? So we're making disciple makers. And then we are trying to honor those unique callings, right? So we have a unique calling around this family ministry idea. Again, there's other people in our community that clearly have a unique calling to the poor in our community. And so we're constantly trying to figure out how to support them and that unique calling. This is not unique to the church. Obviously, the church needs to be involved in healing in all of these areas. But obviously, as a family or as a, there's only so many things we can do and be called to. Although our kids, as our families multiplying, we're watching each branch of the family certainly get very dialed in to ministries that are way beyond what April and I could have done. So they're adding to the family mission in that unique way. But we're all going to do the Genesis 1:28 mandate, which is we're having kids and raising kids. We love children. We love that God has given us this incredible gift of women who can bear children. I think motherhood's been so denigrated. So we just absolutely champion motherhood and fatherhood as a family. And we just celebrate constantly. Anyone in our family who's getting pregnant, having kids, raising kids, spending time with those kids, fathers who are being present with all of that is such a huge part of what we want to celebrate as a household. But then we're over here and everyone, let's go out, and it's not just about our family. Like, we've got to be making this spiritual children. Like, just all this passion we have for having kids physically, we transfer that passion to having children spiritually. Like, let's father and mother. Let's start movements that father and mother more and more children. Let's see in our city like this erupting, like reproducing mandate that Jesus gave us. Such an incredible gift to be able to see the children and grandchildren, great grandchildren spiritually come into the kingdom. And so we're seeing that, and we're counting all those generations. Like, Kelsey's group that she just started represents the people she's discipling represent 4 generations from a group that April started 2 years ago.
How old is April?
She's 52.
52. Okay. And then Kelsey's how old?
She's 25. And
then what is the group that April started?
So 2 years ago, she started a group with young moms, and so Sarah, one of the ladies she discipled. So all of them reproduce, and so she started discipling Kelsey, who's our daughter, but now spiritual granddaughter, in that line.
Yeah.
And now all the younger girls that Kelsey's discipling are, basically, in April's line. So we're trying to count each generation to see if the fruit that, the DNA that we're transferring is actually transferring or not. Like, is this actually happening? So
when it's all said and done, then you can see, like, as a husband, as a father, as caring about the discipleship and the disciple making of your family, now already, or anyone listening, 10 years from now, like, you can sit back and see, here's the investment that I've made into to people. Here's the investment I've made in my kids. Here's how I've helped them now disciple others, and I've been involved in their lives and helping them. So you're doing the 4 generations deep disciple making movement.
Yes.
And it started through your family. You took ownership of the discipleship of your family to get them there.
Yes.
Jeremy and I just did a podcast, Jeremy McCommons, about this vision for mentorship and just the, it's so counter church culture to be thinking as a mentor and to care about generations beyond the one group that you pour into. Right. Because we're kind of stuck in 3-semester open market. I led my group. Now they go and do something else.
Yes.
Where we're robbed of the opportunity, just by model, of small group model. Like, we're robbed of the opportunity then to see legacy of the investment we made and be able to be a part of it generations deep, like a grandparent.
Yes.
And I realized like it's something that we've got to cast vision for to see a movement. And it's so I think it's like people like the first time you hear it, you just don't. There's no way you can get it because you've never seen it in church culture. This idea of really mentoring generations deep and knowing the investment, like the seed that you planted turned into this many seeds and plants, and then seeds beyond that, and being a part of that. Like that's not something that you have to outsource to professional Christians.
No. The movement will be dead if you do that.
Yeah.
Like this has to be a viral multiplying movement. The reason why the reason why the population is multiplying is because it isn't given to a professional class. You have to activate everyone in the culture virtually in order for the culture to reproduce itself. And the same is true in Christianity, but we have neglected this. I mean, we've got something like Barna says 80% of kids growing up in Christian families are leaving the faith of their fathers, their mothers. It's like, this is not good. Like, and part of what I even described in this loop, what's interesting too, is that, April, she really mentored these moms who've, they're mostly in their like late 30s, early 40s, is a lot of the women that my wife mentors. But now they're mentoring we have 4 daughters. They're being mentored by these women that April has been mentoring. So a lot of times people see that like a commitment to discipleship comes at the expense of your own children's discipleship. We've found the exact opposite is true. Like when we pour into people, they're so excited to mentor our kids. And so, yes, we're always discipling and mentoring. All of our kids are apprenticing in our household. Like they see everything we do. And it's an incredibly important part of our spiritual life. But we also need our kids to, like, we're only, I'm only one man, my wife's only one woman. There's lots of different expressions of how these other men and women that we're discipling, they can build into our kids in dynamic ways that we never could. And we're seeing that their gifts are coming to our kids. Our kids have different gifts. Sometimes they see themselves way more in the people we've discipled in some practical ways than they do in us. And so if you want your kids to be surrounded by disciple makers, then go make disciples. And don't think in this one generation mentality that it all stops with the people I build into. And so it's directly taking away from my time with my kids. Like that's very shallow thinking. But this is so powerful for your, yes, it's integrated.
Like your kids have been doing this with you, and I would think that you guys are probably having conversations at dinner about it together.
Yes.
And you've been helping your kids do it.
Yeah.
So here's the scariest question to ask that I like, but I feel like what you're talking about, like, is like, yeah, I want that for my family. And anyone listening, I can't imagine anyone saying they don't want that for their family. And it's not that Jeremy Pryor has a halo over his head. Like I said, like I saw this very thing with the missionary family that I visited.
Right.
It's just not normal in our Christian culture because I kind of back to which goes to the question, like, because of church model, like, can in the average, like, come Sunday morning, attend one service, your kids are not with you, and if they're never with you for small groups, if everything is dissected, if that's the right word, like kids and students away from parents, and all spiritual growth happens apart from one another, at all times, like, one question is like, can we get what you're talking about when all of our church activity is done apart from one another as a family?
Right. Yeah, this is why church model actually really does matter. Like you have to figure out, and I'm friends with several pastors who I think are really facing this question squarely. And I have a lot of respect for them because there is a lot of fear with pastors who are trying to figure out how to elicit like discipleship in a congregation when they feel like they need to make sure that people are coming to the worship service, serving in a ministry, and going to a small group. And then once they really initiate those 3 rhythms, then it causes them to feel like if they ask for a 4th rhythm, disciple making, then they are asking way too much and only 2% of their congregation will do 4 rhythms. The only way I know out of this is you have to take that and flip it on its head and say the number 1 rhythm is disciple making. I just did a podcast with the pastor of one of the largest mega churches here in Cincinnati. I asked him this like very directly. I'm like, where exactly does discipleship fit in your kind of blueprint for your typical person going to church? Like which rhythm? I mean, if these are all the other rhythms, attending worship service, serving in ministry, Mark, he's absolutely number one. And he really meant it. And I kind of pushed him on it. And I'm like, that gives me hope.
Yeah.
I can work with that. I think that won't stop the movement. Like you guys will actually catalyze the movement in our city. But that take a lot of courage for him to say that.
Which is, you kind of like, that's kind of the Jesus model. It's not, let me just show up at the same spot every single, once a week and people come and attend. Like he was going and they were going with him. And while he was while he was disciple making and then they were disciple, like it wasn't, I guess we've just really disconnected this come and learn from disciple making.
Right.
And you can actually be while you're disciple making, you can be teaching people that are learning how to decide. Like it doesn't have to be so separated.
Yeah, we've done this move in the West, and this is this is another thing that is more cultural, but it's affected the church. And that is, we have decided to move away from an apprenticeship model of education into sort of like a lecture or a centralized, systematic, almost industrialized form of education. And so if you're primarily teaching people in classrooms or in lecture halls, then it's really difficult because in ancient times, everyone saw education primarily as an apprenticeship. And so you would go and just be with that carpenter for 2 or 3 years while they were teaching you, while they were doing the thing. And this was the way that rabbis also taught, their Talmudim, their followers. The problem is we don't do that in education anymore. And so this does cause problems because it's really difficult to talk to somebody about, hey, why don't you join me in discipleship? They're thinking we're going to go through a book study. It's going to be very, very head oriented. It's going to be disintegrated from our families or our lives.
Yeah.
And that I understand where that comes from, because this is how we do all education, because it allows us to do it at this industrial scale we're obsessed with in the West. And apprenticeship is very slow, very, very, very specific to, it doesn't scale immediately. It scales through multiplication, but doesn't scale in its own, like in one generation. And so we abandon it too quickly because we don't see the scale that's coming later. But we have to really figure out creative ways. This is why I always take the people I'm discipling off on 2 weekend getaways at every time, because I'm just trying to recapture some of that like apprenticing vibe. Like just be with me for 24 hours. Like come with me to a coffee shop. Like let's talk about these things as we walk along the way. That's hard to do in this culture, especially with guys who work full-time jobs like all of us do.
I recently, the idea has come back, resurfaced for me, this very idea. Cause I realized while Brittany and I are disciple making now, we get one night a week with people and we're trying to figure this out, and just like, this is not enough time. Like, I don't want to wait years. And then I was just like, but I don't necessarily have another evening right now.
Right.
And I was like, but I could probably do 1 weekend away a year.
Yes.
And take guys to a retreat, or I could host a retreat. I mean, it's just, but even that level of thinking is just so foreign, where it's just like, I sometimes forget that I can just do things.
Yeah.
Let alone just find someone else's thing.
Right.
And
people will sign up for a program. That's what I found, is you kind of have to use this sort of program. So when I initiate discipleship with guys, there's like 8 bullets or something in sort of the invitation email. Yeah. And it does involve like, hey, we're going to go on 2 24-hour getaways. I make it really simple. There's just the 4 of us. And so, like while we're driving, we're having, I choreograph that conversation, what we're going to talk about, where we're going to go to dinner, what we're going to do at the hotel, like what we're going to do during the day, how we're going to get back. And I do it during the week, so that like I make them take a day off of work, so that it doesn't take time away from my family, and I can do this lots of times. Yeah. So, but man, recapturing, we got to get creative here, because I feel like you can do more in 24 immersive hours than in 6 months of discipleship. That's what I found.
I agree. So there's something I haven't thought about it until recently, and I'm like, it kind of hit me of like, oh my gosh, I got to reconsider this.
Yeah,
because
worth it.
I can give 1 day within 6 months. That's almost easier for me to give a weekend in 6 months than it is for me to add another evening right now. Totally. When my wife is exhausted with our 2 kids.
Yes. Yeah. And then, so we do the kickoff, but it also creates this intensity around it. It's like, I will not start discipling the guys until we're in a car driving away to a city 2 hours away. So that it creates this like almost like experience of discipleship, where it's like, instead of it just being like a meeting at a coffee shop that just started, and are we doing this? No, like 24 hours, we're going. So we go, and the same thing. One of the ways I make sure, number one, that the seed is in the fruit, that this will multiply. Number two, that we don't peter out in discipleship. I can't stand it when like discipleship sort of dissolves. So it's like, no, we're going to keep a level of intensity during the whole 5 or 6 months, and then we're going to go away for a send off. And then at our send off, I have one really simple goal that happens during our send off getaway, and that is, I want to make sure that every single guy that I'm discipling is one click away from starting their own group. In other words, they write their email, they write their catalog of trainings. We do all that work on the send-off getaway. So by the time we're driving back into the driveway, they know who they're going to disciple, they know when they're going to start, they know what they're going to do. All of that, we plan all of that together. So the seed is in the fruit. It's guaranteed to be there. And then I tell them even before I start discipling, like one of the conditions of me pouring into you is that you will start a group in the next 6 months from when we start. So that start date, that email, all that's ready to rock. This is how we're getting to the 4th generation, by the way, because if everybody does that, if you make it that clear, that simple, they know exactly how to do it. And then you don't end the group until they launch their group. Then this idea of multiplication is much more likely. We got to make that more likely because that's what we're getting killed in the West. Yeah. And these missionary movements are doing amazing at multiplication, but we have to get a lot more serious about multiplication here. And I think in order to do that, these getaways, I think, are really strategic.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Okay. Let's hit pause because I've taken up a ton of your time. And I think this is a great, for anyone listening, like the vision, like there's a lot of vision for what you could do and how you could rethink and how you could re-leverage time and regain time and do discipleship, as a family, as a team. I do hear, Jeremy, that I've heard you say, like, it may require relooking at the calendar and what you're saying yes to and busy churchy things to do discipleship as family and to disciple your family. If everything right now pulls you apart, all your church things, there's maybe some hard decisions to make around there's just things, if you're going to make this a serious value to do as a family. But I have loved this conversation. I think it was really helpful. It's given me again just another vision of like there's more. There's more opportunity, and I think sometimes in the world of discipleship and disciple making, the bar is felt very low, like the ceiling's very low as to what I feel like can be done. So thank you for sharing. Yeah. Thanks for sharing what you do. Where can people follow you, learn more about what you guys do and some of the coaching you provide?
Yeah, I'm on all the socials. I'm pretty active on X personally, and then Family Teams has a pretty active account on Instagram. Okay. I've got 3 podcasts. My personal podcast with my kids, and my wife, Family Teams, and 1,000 Houses, which Alex was on. You can watch our conversation, which was awesome. I loved, Alex, getting to hear your story and your blueprint. So those are places I hang out.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out the show today. I want to invite you to check out the next show. And listen, if you are wanting to learn more about better, strategic, thoughtful, intentional discipleship and disciple making, please subscribe, follow us on whatever platform you love to listen or watch on. Please do like, comment, share. Check out ordinarymovement.com for all the resources that we provide in disciple making, discipleship frameworks and pathways and processes that equip everyday, ordinary men and women who want to follow Jesus and be disciples, who make disciples. Finally, I just want to invite you, please drop a comment. Let me know what questions you have. Feel free to give me feedback. I'm growing as a podcast host. I would love to hear from you. That being said, check out the next show and we'll see you next time.